My name is Tara Farrell. I'm the Chief Executive of Longford Women's Link, and I'll be the chair for this evening's discussion. And I'm joined by Paul Johnston, British Ambassador to Ireland, Gina McIntyre, Chief Executive of the SEUPB, Martín Guillermo, who is the Secretary General of the Association of European Border Regions, and Danny McCoy, who is the CEO of IBEC. So we have 45 minutes to provide all of the solutions and answers to what happens next. So no small task. And I think there's been some really important and energised discussions throughout the day, not just in the sessions, but the discussions that we've heard over the breaks and at lunchtime. So I'm struck by the opening remarks from Peter Osborne this morning, and they were referenced again by Helen about looking back to go forward. And Gina, I'm going to come to you first because, as we know as well as the 25th anniversary of the Centre for Cross-Border Studies, it's also the 25th anniversary of the establishment of the implementation bodies under Strand 2 of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And if I were to ask you, how would you compare the present context with the context of 25 years ago, and how has cooperation progressed, really, is the question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. That's a very broad question. And we've heard a lot already this morning and this afternoon, indeed, from previous speakers about the context 25 years ago and where we are today. And it's worth noting that the North-South body, Strand 2 of the Good Friday Agreement, of which all of us, I see all my fellow brothers and sisters from the bodies here, all of us were created. It didn't happen instantly. There was a lot of work that went on in the background for many, many years before the Good Friday Agreement. And there was also a lot of work that was happening on a cross-border basis that wasn't formalised as part of this Strand 2. So I want to just acknowledge the fact there was a lot of work already happening. And there were, in the early days, there was such an impetus to make this work. And Tim O'Connor here and the late Peter Smith were absolutely instrumental and fantastic. They were behind the bodies. They were going to make this work. All of the administration was put in place for the right reason at that time. And they really took us together as a collective. And they really pushed us forward and protected us. And were absolutely fantastic. I think over the years that maybe the North-South Ministerial Council has suffered from the lack of political stability. And if we'd had that political stability, I think we would be in a different place, and they would be in a different place now. But the bodies have carried on working for 25 years. It didn't matter whether there was stability or not politically. It caused us challenges administratively and in other ways and for decision-making powers, but it didn't stop our work. And the difference now in the cross-border bodies, I think, because I'm speaking a little bit on behalf of them all, I've taken their views, is that the work now is really embedded in the communities. Whether it's on the languages, the waterways, the importance of the waterways, the business side, the safe food and what that's doing for our citizens. It's the community programmes is really, really embedded in the communities. But what we don't want is for this to be taken as just second nature that, and I think it was Martin Fraser mentioned, we cannot become complacent about what we have. There is a lot to build on. But I see such a change in the new Peace Plus programme, which we're honoured to have. And the word relationships has come up an awful lot today. And those programmes, the Peace and Interreg programmes over all these years have been built on relationships between the EU, the UK government, the Irish government, the Northern Ireland Executive. They have always been involved in those programmes in the background. And indeed in the new Peace Plus programme they're very involved, and the UK contribution is very much to the foreground because it's no longer EU funds. But that programme only opened last September and it's 1.1 billion. We will be 75% committed by Christmas, and with a huge reserve list of projects in areas that we can't commit to. And those projects, most of them are cross-border. They are not being forced into this programme because there are no other funds available, whilst I know there is a very restrictive environmental, economic climate there. These are genuine cross-border programmes and cross-community projects. And we just cannot keep up to the amount of what people want to do. And at the macro level, I think it goes back to Michael's point, at the macro level you've got the governments working together with the EU for the programme, and at the micro level you've got the communities and the statutory agencies all coming together to do all of the work. The challenge sometimes is in the maybe official level within the government departments, and I think that's really to do with just change in perspectives, priorities, change in staff, maybe a lack of understanding of how important these programmes are, and we could do with a little bit more support there. And maybe it goes back to what Helen said earlier. There was a training programme that used to happen for civil servants on both sides of the border. And I'm not saying any particular civil servants, I'm just saying that sometimes I think maybe it's that Tom mentioned, the inertia, the difficulty and the other priorities, and maybe sometimes they just think, well, this is a wee bit too hard. This cannot be set aside as different work because the community and the statutory agencies are crying out for this work. Simple things that can be done. Data management on both sides of the border is different for the most simple of things, including just recording hedgehogs and from an environmental point of view, and the data then can't be compared, or air quality, which obviously doesn't respect any borders, as I don't think a hedgehog does either. So the passion and the appetite for cross-border work is really, it's out there.
That's great. So a huge amount of progress and changing from hedgehogs to to cross-border funding programs. And Paul, I might come to you next because we've talked a lot about change, and sometimes the more things change, the more they say the same as they say. There's been a lot of talk about this reset. Mm-hmm. How do you see this reset as contributing to improved cross-border cooperation?
Well, I think it has the potential to make a fantastic contribution, and it's been almost a theme running throughout today, hasn't it? That I think there are two sort of mutually reinforcing resets. One is, as the Secretary of State said, the British government really wants to have a strong, functioning relationship with the government in Ireland, which has not, as he said, been the case for much of the last sort of 10 years on various issues. And there's a strong determination, which I've seen now in two meetings, the Taoiseach being Prime Minister's first overseas guest at Chequers in the middle of July, and then the Taoiseach hosting the Prime Minister at Farrell 10 days ago. Their agreement to have a summit next year, and really to look across the span of the relationship and work out how to strengthen that. And obviously one of the core interests at the heart of the relationship is, as the Secretary of State said, Good Friday Agreement, the shared responsibilities, co-guarantors. And I think the more that we can strengthen the UK-Ireland relationship and the UK-EU relationship, the more, including for the issues that Gina was touching on, the more we can see a context in Northern Ireland which is more positive. Now, that's not to say that Northern Ireland, civic society, government, business, doesn't face significant challenges. We've heard some of them outlined today, but there's also tremendous opportunities. And I think the improved British-Irish relationship really is a strong net positive for that, because it takes away some of the friction. And if we can get a stronger UK-EU relationship, which takes away some of the trading frictions, then I think that those are two important sort of positive elements for people, businesses, consumers, government to work with in Northern Ireland.
Great. So you mentioned business and trading, and Danny, I might bring you in here. When we look at the where to next question, I know that long-term economic and business prospects are notoriously difficult to predict, but from your perspective, what are the kind of business prospects in the short to medium term that you think would be important in the context of North-South cooperation?
So, if we think in terms of just generations for a moment, the scale of the capacity of both islands to adapt to the world as it was phenomenal. Globalization was a boon for both Britain and Ireland. So, label Celtic Tiger in the Republic context and Cool Britannia in the other. The renaissance from the single European market late 80s to 2016 was phenomenal. And it was driven by the joint premise of globalization and more locally by the peace process. And then that moment of Brexit, that which can't be spoken of, phenomenon, really has saundered the joint momentum even to the point of the stunning, either I ask questions really badly, but the obfuscation from just asking, are you going to talk to unions and civic society with the Secretary of State in Northern Ireland was pretty stunning, is that we seem to be now not even talking the same language in terms of where we're going in terms of our investment model. And I think that the reset that the ambassador talks about is crucial. And I think it's in spirit, it's incredibly important, but we need to start seeing it being tangible. And so put a lot of store on the reset, in particular the March. But to answer the question you asked, Tara, the thing that actually brought us together so strongly and so successfully, which was openness, globalization, and so on, that world is changing dramatically. And this island is a really small, but unfortunately, in the world that is, the European Union is even diminished by the lack of Britain there, but Britain itself is diminished. And we're looking at incredible access changes towards Asia, not alone the China-US issue, but so we collectively, if we get together, will still not be that significant in the world, but we're much better together than apart. And I think that's the real lesson from business. We have the opportunity to reset here. Let's take it.
And thanks, Danny. And sticking with that discussion around, we're a small island in the context of Europe, and then the wider, the wider global context. And Martin, cohesion has been brought up a lot this morning. Anthony spoke about it as being one of the central pillars of the centre. It was also referred to in the last panel as a really critical issue. So where does the association see that short to medium term, that vision of cohesion, and particularly on external borders in the EU?
Well, thank you for this question. For us, this is every 7 years, we always listen to the discussions on the next financial framework of the EU. And then always cohesion is, when in the general speaking, everybody's talking about cohesion, how nice it is to have social, economic, and territorial cohesion. But then when they come into the strategic topics like defense, etc., there is always a question mark on cohesion. Is it possible to stop cohesion? I don't think so. I think it's part of the DNA of the European Union. And the citizens are aware, particularly in border areas. So for me, it's difficult to consider this border as an external border, but yeah, technically it is. So, but probably the case of the island has been one of the arguments we have used, one of the 3-4 arguments we used to show the evidence of the impact of cohesion. So that's why when island or the land border was out of the Interreg programs, etc., we had a big gap there. It's like when the UK left, that really we have a gap. But we think that this is an anomaly that will be solved very soon. So then we are defending cohesion towards the Commission and the Member States particularly, because there is always some tricky positions. But at the end, one of the main arguments is, right now we are talking about a budget of the EU, which is including the extraordinary addition after the pandemic or during the pandemic. We are talking about 2 or 3% of the total GDP. So now people are talking about common defense. They are talking again, as usual, about a common foreign policy, but not about increasing substantially the budget. How can you imagine a common defense for the EU maintaining this little budget, even if they ban cohesion? So we think that we need now a strong bet for a serious European integration. After 60 years, I think the benefits and the impact of the EU policies on the development of the territories and this cohesion is evident, is clear. We have plenty of studies, plenty of testimonies from the citizens and the enterprises, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, which are the more affected by closing or opening or whatever, that the cohesion really adds value to the European integration. And the European integration adds value to the policies developed by the different member states. So we are trying to find even more different type of arguments from different sectors of society, from different parts of Europe, to show the benefits of cohesion and to show the member states that probably now is the time to increase substantially the commitment. I mean, money. We need probably to multiply Interreg programs. Interreg and Erasmus is probably the 2 programs which have made more for European citizenship and even to engage the next generations. so to guarantee the project to survive. But the impact in the budget is minimum, and the impact of the total budget in the GDP is even minimum. So that's the future we see is a stronger cohesion policy, the integration of more policies. Why not defense, of course, but then with a substantial increase. We have to face all the challenges that have been said here today, just transition, demographic challenges, which in border areas are particularly crucial. We have to avoid that the talent is leaving. We have to face the new technological challenges, demographic, whatever, and this can only be done with a stronger commitment by all the member states.
Okay. Thank you. And Danny, I might just go back to, sticking with the whole European question around that broader EU single market. How do you see that developing over the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
And just in passing to just set the groundwork for this, is that one of the features that's coming from this protectionism defense is that we need to acknowledge that we just are possibly at the end of one of the longest global booms, right from the financial crisis. It was about 15 years ago. The world has been in an incredible upward trajectory, because if you spoke in the 1990s about what actually makes a difference to households and societies, it's working. It's having a job. The world has never seen unemployment rates globally at such low levels as of now. And against that backdrop, this is true in Europe as well. So in the history of the EU, collectively, we're at our lowest unemployment rates. And here we are, we're worried about challenges from disruptive technologies. But the reality is, the likelihood is we'll all still be working. The labour market seems to have become incredibly resilient, despite all the fears of what might happen next. So that's probably, if you're looking for the way forward, there's no sign of the labour market changing. In fact, this sounds like nirvana. If you could explain to people that they could potentially knock into the office maybe once, twice a week if you feel like it, and that your wages will still be coming in as evident by the income tax returns right across both jurisdictions. This looks like nirvana that we're at now. Now, people find different ways of being unhappy in different ways. But the issue then is the question you asked: is there any sign that the European Union is going to get worse in that dimension? I would believe the answer to that is no. Will it become relatively worse? The answer to that is absolutely, affirmatively yes. And this is what we see from the Draghi report on competitiveness, the Letter report, and what's happening in the world right now. And that's a shared issue for European leaders to ensure that if Europe wants to have its global place, it has to act collectively. And unfortunately, it will have to act collectively defensively. Militarization, unfortunately, is now becoming the world that we're in. We have benefited, particularly in this island, and I would contend in Britain as well, from intangible assets in terms of creative industries, in terms of our universities, in delivering people and services and so on. But the fundamental thing about intangible assets is they require goodwill. Because if there's no goodwill, all you have is an idea, and you don't have anything real, and you don't have any tangible. Once the goodwill starts to go south, which it has with all of the bad actors we have in the world, then any jurisdiction that depends upon goodwill, and I contend that Europe and Britain actually do, then we are very vulnerable because other places have the resources, or at least are colonizing them as we speak. So short term, as in the next 10 years, Europe looks good. Long term, not good.
Okay. And on that theme then, Paul, I might come to you, closer to home, about the evolving UK-EU relationship and what contribution that makes to North-South cooperation, to...
So I think, just picking up on something that Danny said and Gina said as well, I think one of clearly the challenges that Britain and the European Union face is that 10, 15 years ago, Secretary of State referred to Fukuyama. I remember a colleague of mine writing about the postmodern world. The EU now lived in a world where everyone proceeded by cooperation. and the world would have more and more trade deals, and the UN would become stronger, and we'd all realise that the way to proceed and to ensure shared prosperity was through cooperation. As Danny's saying, we see a range of actors now in the world who don't take that view, and so for individual countries and for the EU and for NATO, where I worked for a couple of years, worked in the EU as well, there has been in the last 5-10 years this realisation that the world is a more difficult place. And that's, in a way, one of the sort of negative prompts for our UK-EU reset, which is to realise that although we're no longer a member of the European Union, although we're not reversing the Brexit decision, we're not going back to the single market or the customs union, we do see a lot of shared interests and values. And we see, particularly in the security sphere broadly defined, which is everything from cyber security, energy security, health security, as well as foreign policy and other forms of security cooperation, that there's a lot that we can do together in a more sort of structured way. For us, the sort of fundamentals of European security will always be about NATO, and we now have 2/3 of the NATO members already spending 2% of their GDP, which goes some way towards the point about EU defence, but the EU will clearly want to evolve its own sort of defence capacity. But we hope that will be done in a sort of inclusive way towards countries like us who will have an interest, not least in defence industry. And so it goes back to the point I think that also Tom Hannay made earlier, that it's quite important to, I think, non-member states, but also more widely, that the EU continues to be, even as it develops its so-called strategic autonomy, continues to be outward-facing, and we would say, I think Ireland would say as well, economically liberal. So I think the UK-EU reset is going to be an important moment, as we're also trying to reset our relationships with a number of European countries, not least Ireland. We've got to work with the grain of where the European Union is heading and realising that it's a new institutional cycle for them. In a number of European countries, politics are, as we put it diplomatically, quite complex. So we have a government now with a big majority, a 5-year term in front of it. The new European Commission has a 5-year term in front of it, so there's a certain synchronicity there. But I think the more that we can do for the UK-EU relationship, to go back to my earlier point, it feeds positively into clearly the British-Irish relationship, North-South cooperation, as well as East-West. So it's a big and complex agenda, but I think we're starting in a positive place, and we've got every reason to pursue it vigorously.
And on that theme then of shared interest and values, and if we're looking at, and Gina, the implementation bodies, what do you see as the key challenges and opportunities over the next, say, 25 years in relation to those?
Well, as I said, everybody has said it already today, including the First Minister and the panel on the NSMC. It needs changed. There is a lot to do. There's an opportunity here. The institutions have been set up now for 25 years, and things have changed. The world has changed, and it's time to reflect it and look at that and revise. But I don't mean you get rid of it. But the institutions are so important. But they need to maybe remove some of the bureaucracy elements that made ministers' decisions. That's not relevant for them to be doing. And as I said, that the last couple of communiques have shown from the plenaries that really they're moving into a different era and a different approach. And so we would like to see that reflected to the implementation bodies as well in relation to being able to take some further decisions, having a bit more flexibility, being able to react quicker in some circumstances. We've talked a lot today about how slow some things can be, but if there was opportunities for us to be able to react. I think there are an awful lot of areas that we can still do a lot of cross-border work in that haven't been formalised under our bodies that currently exist. There is a health issue is an obvious one, education is another obvious one. There are some other areas that could benefit from the formalisation of like an implementation body, because these bodies are actually, we work through different departments, different policy departments, all of our bodies, and they kind of are the little hub of the north-south work in there, and anything that needs done can happen in there. But Europe has used the example, I'm not sure if they actually knew they were using the example, of the north-south bodies in addressing issues of challenges of borders all across Europe. They have mechanisms and instruments set up now to try to develop, if you like, north-south bodies. And it has been said that the north-south bodies in Strand 2 was the most significant, greatest political achievement in history here, and the North-South bodies are that political experiment and achievement in action, and there's an awful lot more that we can do.
Thank you. And just kind of moving on from that then, Martin, your, I suppose, perspective from the association in relation to the impact of EU programmes in Ireland and what impact they've had on this, this whole idea of cooperation and what the future of that might look like from your perspective.
We think that this anomaly will end, and then we can continue, because actually, as I said before, the case of the whole island has been an argument to defend this type of policies in other parts of Europe. So we can only think that this should be strengthened, continue, and even keep on looking at the different experiences, because the case in Ireland has been analysed from so very deeply by the political bodies, by the research institutions, but also by the organizations themselves. And there is enormous knowledge there that we are using it. So first, you have the extreme example of the Good Friday Agreement and all the programs developed afterwards, the peace program in particular, where we are using this in order to identify gaps in other borders in Europe where there is a big lack of trust still, institutional but also citizens' trust. And without this trust, it's impossible to do the sophisticated type of cooperation that citizens are demanding. So I think there is a kind of, we still do it, the Center of Cross-Border Studies is one of our references for that, and still, even not being in the core of the EU cohesion policy, etc., still is providing enormous knowledge. So I think there is a duty of Europe with these places where their past, tragic past, has been an enormous hope for the whole of the continent, and this intangible is really what we are trying to develop. It's very complicated to discuss this with the member states, but when you go down in the scale of governance and you arrive to the mayors in Germany, which are facing now the closing of the borders, or in Central Europe, where there are big gaps now with nationalism, etc., then still this example is coming back once again to show that things could be worse. But of course, things could be much better if we rely on these wide European policies which are addressing the citizens that otherwise will be left behind.
And then thinking beyond Europe, and Paul, I might come to you on this, the whole idea of international investment, what do you think the impact of that might be in the next 25 years?
So I think Northern Ireland, since the Good Friday Agreement in particular, has benefited from this fantastic goodwill, attention, support from the European Union, the United States, obviously the two governments. And I think we're now at this period where we have the institutions up and running again, we have a stronger UK-Ireland relationship emerging, a stronger UK-European relationship emerging, we have the Windsor Framework being implemented. The Secretary of State said the government wants to evolve its relationship with the EU in ways that hopefully will make the trade frictions less. So I think there's a real positive story there to sell, and I think the First Minister and the First Deputy First Minister, not least in Washington in March, we're making a very important pitch. So I think in a world where, if you're often speaking to CEOs, they'll say if we're trying to persuade our global boards to invest in the UK compared to, say, Slovenia or somewhere else, political stability, a readiness to have the right investment climate, skills, infrastructure, these are all things that matter. Now, our two countries, the UK and Ireland, they're in different situations in many respects, but they both have some of the similar challenges of renewing our infrastructure, the green and digital transitions. So Northern Ireland has this very particular place because of the Windsor Framework. It has its own challenges, as you heard from the Secretary of State, but it has fantastic opportunities, and I think if we can capitalise, and everyone in this room has a role to play, we can capitalise on the international attention it's had, which may not endure because the world has lots of problems to cope with. If we can sell a really strong story about Northern Ireland and its potential and its important and different and unique characteristics, then I think we can sustain and develop the international investment that it needs, just as the rest of the UK and Ireland needs to continue to grow in a world where, as Danny was saying, relative decline is a fact we've got to live with, but we've got to go for, absolute growth and investment and transformation.
And actually, Danny, I might put the same question to you from your perspective about, the role international investment can play, not just in economic prosperity, but in that whole, North-South cooperation and reconciliation.
Yeah, and I think the lesson of both globalization was a great advantage, but for both islands, the peace process wasn't just for Northern Ireland, it was for the benefit of the island of Britain as well. Having lived in London in 92 to 96, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement was much about stability for the United Kingdom more generally and Britain specifically to build an investment story. And so that lesson that we jointly learned from a successful peace process also led to prosperity, to the point that Michael Darcy was saying earlier this morning. And so investment requires that certainty. And one of the big features that doesn't get enough acknowledgement is that why did the Republic of Ireland end up on this incredible surge inside the last 10 years? Where the first year of it by international acknowledgement is 2015, the leprechaun economics year of Paul Krugman's jibe, is that constitutional uncertainty, in addition to demonstrable peace, is a big issue for both islands. And so why 2015, a full year before the Brexit year? I would contend that the potential breakup of the United Kingdom in 2014 was a huge factor. The Scottish referendum doesn't get enough acknowledgement as an uncertainty feature. And if that be so, then both islands and both business communities and both jurisdiction societies need to have a conversation together to say, how do we actually ensure that stability for investment into the future is not undermined by other actors who will like to say both of those islands have an uncertain 10 years or 15 or 20 years coming because there's potentially constitutional change being talked about. Whether it actually happens or not doesn't really matter. It's the fact that they create the uncertainty. And so what we experienced in the last 10 years was a kind of a zero-sum game where arguably Britain lost out on investment and Ireland gained. But if we go forward together, we're potentially looking at a negative-sum game when it comes to investment if we actually don't jointly consider that the investment story is actually a joint production for Ireland and the United Kingdom going forward.
Right, thank you. I think we have time for a couple of questions from the floor, if anybody has any. There are microphones going around. If there's any question.
People are tired. They are tired.
Thanks. If nobody else is asking a question, I want to ask one. I want to ask one about the EU budget and the EU budget that's used to subsidise arms manufacturers in the EU for arms that are going to Israel to be used in the genocide of Gaza. And I really think that, as a population, we are very concerned. We have no way of disaggregating that budget. So as Irish taxpayers, we pay into that. And I would caution, what's happening around that. I would also caution around the structures that were set up that people have had faith in globally being completely impotent in being able to stop the genocide in Gaza. And what can be done because I absolutely believe in cohesion, cooperation, and everything that goes with it. We're better together. But I think that has laid bare some of the weaknesses around that. And I would just ask for any suggestions of how that could be made better. I'm very concerned as well around the central bank and what the central bank has done in the last few days to facilitate the sale of Israeli bonds, despite ISEP divesting from companies who are operating in the occupied territories. So there seems to be a conflict there. And yet we're being told that there's nothing that the Irish government can do about it because it's EU law, that would be illegal to do anything else. I know we're talking about North-South, but I think it's very important that we talk about what's happening globally as well, because it impacts on us all. Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll take a couple together. No. Martin, I might put that question to you about the EU budget.
Well, it's not my speciality, and even But of course I have an opinion, and in our association we have been talking about this situation because it's a little bit weird. And we are based in Germany. And I can tell you, when we are in a meeting which is more or less public, and then we raise something like that, suddenly there are reactions, then the institutions, especially the German institutions, will start to close the shop, and then we have to... It's not possible right now to talk about that. Then, at the European level, if we look at the composition, the current composition of the European Parliament, I don't know if it is the right place, but it should be the Parliament. But now it seems to be everything very simplistic. So if something is more conservative, it's pro-Israel, even if they are doing crimes every day, the state, because in the case of Palestine, there are terrorist groups, but I don't think that the children are militants of Hamas. But then we try to talk to some members of the European Parliament, and they would be very, very, they would agree with you totally, as I do. But then even those guys, when they go to the plenary of the Parliament, they will never raise their voice, because probably the result will be the opposite. And a second element that we have detected is, in Europe, all the management of funds, etc., and direct funds and co-financing by states is very transparent, except in a few fields: defense, some external action issues, and energy. And if you have the trick on how to make this transparent, I think we would solve part of the problems that the EU have. In particularly, I don't know if this is the right English word, hypocritic attitude.
Hypocrite.
Because we are supposed to be the defenders of human rights, etc. But when it comes to real action by the member states, the council, let's say, then it's the economy. Stupid, as this guy was saying once, and we feel stupid, because at the end it's the economy. There is a gap. That's why the European Union is a good construction, and it could be even better. How? More commitment, more trust between the different member states, and then let's do integrated policy, not only for cohesion, which is very important, and for agriculture, but for defense and for human rights. Have you detected that the other institution, which is not the EU, the Council of Europe, which is the one which is supposed to deal with human rights, there is every time a longer distance between both? Unless even the Council of Europe is every day asking to react, but the European Union don't dare to do it. I think there could be the solution to a stronger connection with the policy body, which means the Council of Europe, or an increase in the political union, which is not existing. Last point, we always say that in border areas in the EU, we don't see the single market. It's something in construction, but the single market is lacking in many cross-border areas, but the first 2 or 3 titles of the European Treaty, which are dealing with the rights, human rights, etc., are also absent. This is our vision. We demand to change the situation, but it's not so easy.
Thanks very much, Martin. And just in the interest of time, I have one more question I wanted to ask all of the panellists in the context of where to next and the future. So we've talked a lot about the challenges today, but we've also talked about the opportunities. If you were to pick one opportunity that you think is key for the next 5 to 10 years and how that might be realised, what would it be? And I appreciate it's a very broad question, but just to finish on a positive opportunity note. So Danny, I might start with you.
Our geography, being stuck in the Atlantic with everybody realising that a renewable energy source is all around us, collectively both islands live in that space. Why don't we collectively try to harness that and become an energy provider to the future and hit a number of different metrics at the one time? So
great. Thank you.
That's the opportunity.
Martin?
I was going to say to put the citizens in the center of the policies, but probably this is even more crucial, because if we don't do something on energy and Green Deal, there will be no citizens to benefit from that.
Gina?
Yeah, where do you start with that one? One thing.
You have a magic wand.
Yeah. Well, I would say we should really reflect on where we've come from, and we're taking too much for granted. of where we are now. And I think we should really reflect at all levels of where we came from and the changes that have been made, and maybe remind ourselves how difficult it was. And so in doing so, a renewed impetus for cross-border work, for the Good Friday Agreement, for all of the strands, for the north, south, east, west, all of that. I think there just needs to be a little bit of a hit the refresh button on that.
Great. And Paul, final word.
So a personal word, and borrowing something one of my colleagues or former colleagues said, looking sort of globally, but I think it applies to Northern Ireland, these islands as well. We need to try and restore people's faith in institutions and trust that institutions can deliver for people, which is something for the institutions and for the people. We need to address inequality, both within our own societies and internationally, because that's very corrosive. And I think also we need to get ahead of technology. I think this is going to be an era ahead of accelerating technological change. So can we make sure through our education and through business and through the wider social dialogue that was touched on earlier, that we can ensure as many people as possible have the skills they need to confront the opportunities of tomorrow.
So thank you so much for your insight and your expertise and a really good panel discussion. So thank you to Danny, to Martin, Gina and Paul. Thank you.
We've been talking about borders, cooperation, institutions, north-south, east-west, but we have someone here who has looked at the geography that we occupy from a perspective that I'm pretty sure nobody in this room will have had that particular perspective. It is my absolute pleasure to present to you former NASA astronaut Cady Coleman, author of the new book, Sharing Space. Cady Coleman, everybody.
Very nice to meet everyone. It's fun to be a surprise. Am I a surprise? And just think if you were sitting next to me on a plane and I wasn't wearing my jacket, right? And if you asked me what I did, sometimes it always feels like I'm bragging to say, well, I'm an astronaut. And sometimes I just have a lot of work to do, and I have to do that work first before I get to say hello to you. And sometimes it works that way. But I always think it's interesting, because I'll still be the same person when I take off my jacket, right? But unless you sort of take the time to get to know people, you don't always, even when you think you know a lot about them, you don't. And I say these things because I think it's, that kind of understanding people and just never, essentially, what I'm going to say in 15 minutes, right, is that, you can never give up on trying to find out more about your team, and especially about the team that you're trying to be more together with, and yet you're really different. And it's not easy, and that's a lot about, I'm not trying to sell the book, but it's a lot about what my book is about sharing space. And so why don't we go ahead and, I guess you're already looking at photos there. I'll just tell you quick, we're going to run through a bunch of slides because they were all loaded in, and I was only going to show you a few, but now we're just going to race through some. So you just see a sense of how we as teams at NASA, I'm retired from there, but how we evolve. I mean, we built a space station together with 17 different countries, and really more than that. And it's an international space station. It's still up there, and it's still running, and none of that is easy. Right? And I'm sure everyone in here, really understands that. And so what you were just looking at was our crew of the space shuttle, my second mission. The woman on the left was the first woman commander, the first woman to command the space shuttle. But this is really the star of the show, and she will say that herself, and that is the Chandra X-ray Observatory. Everything you have ever heard about black holes came from this telescope, this mission. And this was a mission where we actually really had to bring people together, where there were telescope designers, there were people building a whole new mission control and had never worked in one or worked with another one. There's the NASA mission control that think they need no other people. And there's one person in NASA mission control that represents that telescope plus every other experiment and has one seat, one voice. And when I went to Boston, to visit the telescope control center, the new one that was getting themselves oriented and set up. And they would say, oh, that guy, David Brady, the payload officer. Oh, he says no. We ask him this, he says no. And then he says no again. And I could tell that they think of David Brady like this, right? I mean, that he's just the person who doesn't care about their project. And I went back home and I said, David Brady, I told them, he's the person that out of everyone at NASA loves your telescope the most and will just throw himself in front of any barrier. And if he tells you no, it's because it actually really is no. And he loves you, loves your telescope. I said, you have to find travel money for David Brady to go to Boston so that there can be, we can work together. They can work together. And so I think there's interesting ways that all of us can interfere, meddle, and change the future just by being ourselves and reaching out to others even when we're kind of tired at the end of a day listening to lots of stuff. So let's just keep flipping through some slides. And this is an image of a black hole, never possible without the Chandra X-ray Observatory, launched in 1999, and then only supposed to work for 5 years, still working 25 years later. And literally, there's nothing we know about black holes that doesn't come from that telescope, so a cool effort. But I like to talk mostly about the space station. This is our literally city in space. You're looking at it sort of like the whole big picture. It's actually quite big, but we live along the middle axis there. It's about 10 modules the size of train cars without any seats in them. So there's so much more space. You see us in the capsules and going up and scrunched in. It only takes 8.5 minutes to get to space. 8.5 minutes. It takes a long time to parallel park, okay? Anywhere from a couple hours to a couple days. But it's only to get up there and actually be in orbit, that's what it takes, and it's amazing. This is pictures of Sonny and Butch, the people you might have heard were stranded in the terribly large, wonderful place where we fly everywhere. Keep going. And you can kind of just keep going along there. There's Sonny showing off food. None of it tastes very good, but it's actually very fun to eat. And this is the folks that are up there now, with the exception of there's a couple more now too. And this is the space station itself. And this picture, if I could hold here for a second, is an iconic photograph because it shows the space shuttle on the left and the space station in one picture. And this was taken actually by our crew as we departed in the Russian Soyuz to come home, and knowing that it was only 2 more shuttle missions. This was the second of the last shuttle mission, and then the next one was the last shuttle mission. If you don't take a picture that shows the whole project that you did together, people need to have a picture like this so that when they start something else that is just as hard or even harder, they have something to remind them that even though this was successful, boy, it was really, really hard, but we did it together. Next. And so we can just kind of flip through these. This is the Soyuz, the ship we go up in. This is our crew. It's myself, Dmitry Kondratyev. Stop here for a second. Dmitry Kondratyev from Russia, Paolo Nespoli. And we're a crew of 3 in the Soyuz. We're going to go up to the space station. There's 3 more people up there. 1 American, Scott Kelly, and 2 Russians. So then we become 6. A couple of months later, they go home, a new crew comes. So we're part of 2 groups of 6, but look at our group of 3 that trained together for 3 years. I tell people, this is a photograph of all of us very excited about going to space. And Dmitry knows that I say this, because here's the deal. This is actually a photograph of all of us excited about going to space. And I flew with a commander that does not have a particularly expressive face on any day of the week. He knows I say that. And certainly not in a photograph. And so when I come to him and I go, Dima, here's my good idea, which I'm probably not that confident about, and the face looks back at me, well, we could lose all of my good ideas, right? And he's been in the Russian military, he'd never worked with women. I was someone very new for him. He was certainly someone very new for me. But the mission is bigger and more important than all of us. And it's kind of a paradox, is that the mission is so big and so important, and yet it actually depends on each of us individually to form these coalitions, to make things work between groups that we're just not actually planning to spend so much time or struggles together. Next. And that's how big the space station is. And this is a 1.5-minute movie. Shows us reporting in, waving, climbing into the smallest elevator imaginable. Our little capsule is enclosed, it's sort of encased in a big tin can at the top of that. And boy, I don't know why that did that, but that's okay. And so this is the crew that when we get up there, this is now the 6. You might recognize Scott Kelly on the right there. He's one of the Kelly twins. Next. And so NASA doesn't just throw us here, and I highly recommend this, but NASA sends us to, in the States, National Outdoor Leadership School. So we get to go and do things in places where it's not so dangerous, they'll lose us. It's not that they care so much, they just don't want to spend money on new people, right? But living underwater, 6 of us with a mission, which was practice some lunar stuff, and you can just flip through these. Practice some what would we do on the moon, and then also, you can keep going. And also telerobotic surgery on each other. I'm like, this is a bad idea. But it turns out that it's on very, very intricate models that we're learning how to figure out how are we going to do surgery if we're up in Mars. And you can just keep flipping through here. Here's our group. We have a hand surgeon, 3 astronauts. And now here's our second. So Scott and his crew went home, our second group of 3. And then, and I'm mixing space and Earth. To get ready, I spent 2.5 months, but 6 weeks in a tent, 200 kilometers from the South Pole, with 3 other people that I had literally never met, and we certainly did not choose each other. And, and so how do we learn some lessons that help us do these things, to be a crew that finishes each other's sentences like this. Next. And, when you look at this picture, I think this is an important one to see, like, you might look and say that, well, 2 people look the same. Those identical twins are very, very similar. I spent time in space with both of them. The Italian is the tallest. I look different because, as one of the twins said to the other, you didn't tell her about the wardrobe. But, I look good, okay? And we're all dressed, appropriately. But in that picture, you see several guys who all look the same, but I assure you, even the identical twins are different people. And so on your team, there's people that are really obvious. This is Catherine Coleman Johnston, who actually paved the way to space in terms of figuring out trajectories. How do we get off our planet and back? Next. And she's a mathematician, a space scientist, an astrophysicist, and she and many, it turns out women like her, were the ones who pioneered these mathematical studies that helped, and even John, it's in the movie, next, it's in the movie called Hidden Figures, that it's apparently true, that John Glenn actually said, before I climb in this capsule, I want you to repeat those calculations with that newfangled IBM computer that barely fit in the doorway and you might have broken it. I don't know if he said that, but I want that woman, the smart one, to repeat those calculations before I climb in that capsule. So it all comes down to trust, I think. Next. And how do you establish that trust? I think you find ways to connect. Some people are easy. Paolo Nespoli, Italian, you see it in this picture, easy. Next. Nicole Stott is coming up, and she and I have kids about the same age. We can exchange a look that just says, oh, have you already had an entire day and it's only 8 in the morning? Yeah, me too, right? So we have some things in common and we try to draw on those. And in this picture is a picture of our crew that we had accomplished the hardest spacewalk combination robotics, and we really had to be so vulnerable to each other. Al and I, the guy in the spacesuit, that's why he just, I came in to take pictures of his gloves, he just grabbed me. And this is my favorite picture of any I ever have in space, because to me, I get chills just looking at it, because it epitomizes that we really had to talk to each other, and I was like, okay, this part is a part that I am unsure about. And so if I know that out there you can talk, and whenever you talk, we all have to listen, but Al, do not talk during this part until I tell you I am set, because I am nervous about this part. And so we really had to be vulnerable to each other, I think, in order to establish that trust. Next. And, you shouldn't judge, a book by its cover, but we all do, and it's very human. And I think the biggest trick is understanding that, acknowledging that elephant in the room. I did not pick a woman I went to MIT for undergrad, chemistry, and when we picked lab partners for chemistry, there was a woman, tall, blonde hair. She looked like Miss California. And I was like, you need a really good lab partner, and I don't think she's it. She looked at me, there was only 2 women, right? She looked at me and she's like, nobody that cute could do chemistry. Well, Laura got a Genius Grant, the MacArthur Fellowship, and she's a famous MIT professor now. and I got a pretty good job. So were we wrong? We were so wrong. And it is so easy, and I think that the thing to do, it's not easy for me to talk about what it's like to be a woman astronaut of color at NASA, because I don't know. And that kind of keeps me from going, hey, is there anything I can do to help? Because there shouldn't be anything to help with, because there shouldn't be a problem. We're all treated the same. But we don't all feel the same. And so just admitting that we've got some hard things to talk about and we don't quite know how, and just really showing up with good intent, I think is one of the ways to actually cross these borders. And Scott knows that I say that the robot is the one on the left, but this is also Scott. He has just found the largest slingshot on the entire space station. If they knew how fun it was up there, they would make us wear helmets all the time. Next. And perspective. What is it like to look at the Earth? And how do you share that with other people? Scott took an especially clever photo. You see, with a wide lens. You see the outline of the Earth. You can see the whole Earth below him, or actually you can see the Sinai Peninsula right below to the right. You can see Scott's ugly feet and even uglier ankles, right? And his girlfriend taught him, hey, good pictures are good pictures, but for where you're going, you have to show them a human was there too. Next. And so we're not that far above the Earth, about 400 kilometers. Next. And if we're looking out our window at space, I always feel like I'm looking up and out at the sea, like we were up in, we were near Lily Finnegan's pub, but it was not open, just so you know. So we were near there, but looking out at the sea, I always feel like I'm up and looking out to see such a vista. But when we look down, this is Massachusetts, Cape Cod, as one of my crewmates said from Massachusetts. He looks down, he goes, "Oh my gosh, it looks just like the map," because it does, and it looks different in every light. And every one of us, when we look, keep going. You could just flip through these slides, keep going. You see Massachusetts in different lights, and every one of us, when we look out the same window, and you can just flip through some of these views that show people looking out the window, just going again and again. But sorry, I said that, now I'm going to say stop, sorry. I forgot that this was here, but it's about perspective, and we are used to looking at people up and down, and we're almost there. We're looking at people from an up and down perspective. And sometimes in order to have a different conversation, you have to come from a different angle or a different perspective. And if you kind of look upside down here, then you see, now you can look at it right side up. Here you see us on the bottom. So if you can see us, but it's because we're now flipped over. But you look up at the top, you can't see Sasha and Andre. So we have to learn to look at things differently in order to have a different conversation. Next. And to do that, you have to realize everyone could see the same image, but a different perspective. Karen Nyberg, Naoko Yamazaki from Japan, Samantha Cristoforetti from Italy, Jessica Watkins from the US. I mean, we went for a long time to having only one silhouette that reminded us. Only one person thought to take a picture. You can keep going. And just by changing your perspective and learning that everyone really has something else to show. And could you go to slide 76 for me? It's right at the end, and it shows me on an Irish stamp. So go to the Irish stamp picture. And I like to show this picture, of course, because I'm extremely honored, and my family is over the moon, that I was part of a commemorative series of stamps for the moon landing. So the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. But what's really significant about this, next, and I just have this in one more picture. I'm looking at our nervous leader down here. He's not nervous, but, and this is a picture with the children of the person who designed the stamp. And apparently the first thing that he said was, okay, would it be okay if I put people on the stamp that weren't dead yet? Because he was told to put astronauts of Irish descent on the stamps. And he wanted to put women on there. Because he has kids and he wants them to grow up in a world where everyone is seen. And so I think I share this slide all the time, of course, because I'm on a stamp, but really I have a series of slides that I show about how a single person can make a difference and create change and create ripples that go around the world. And when Irish kids go to mail something with a €1 stamp, sometimes the one they get is going to have a woman astronaut on it. And they just think that's like normal. And that's one way that change is made. Next. Oh. Thank you. And anyways, and this is, keep going. So that's the slide I wanted to end on. And so this is Dr. Nora Patton. And I'm of Irish descent, but it certainly gets better than that, and that is to send a person who's Irish up to space. And we'll say there's also a woman who is, it's Rosemary, who is chosen by the European Space Agency. And she is chosen, she's in their group of astronauts, not assigned yet. And we'll see who goes first and when. But, I mean, and the only thing better than one Irish woman in space is two, okay? I'm just saying. But Nora has been selected as a scientist to go on a Virgin Galactic flight and do experiments. And down here, before we get ready to do experiments in space, even a few seconds of weightlessness is enough to test out whether you're doing the right experiment out or not, or it's certainly helpful. And 30 seconds in our airplane that goes up and down is actually a long time to be able to understand, is our hardware going to be successful up in space? And so Nora is going to have several minutes of microgravity to do some of these experiments. And every one of us brings our own perspective, and we also bring a gazillion people with us. And I know if you're here today, you're interested in solving problems and solving them together. It probably never, ever gets easy, but just realize that when you do that, you bring people with you as well. And thank you for having me today.
It's been humbling, really, today. I'm only going to take a couple of minutes, I promise. But I do want to thank our team, the team at CCBS. We're small, literally, some of us. But I think we do a pretty good job. I want to thank our board, our chair, and all the board members for all their support in terms of what we do. I'd like to thank the guys at Moonlighting, who've done a fantastic job, as usual. Thank you so much. And also to all the staff here at the Ballymascallan Hotel, who made us very, very welcome. As I said, I'm really humbled to see so many people here today to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. I think it is the fact that so many people are here today. It's a real testament to the value of this organisation and to the vision of its founding director, Andy Pollock. I'm really proud to be carrying on the journey that he began in 1999 and that my predecessor, Ruth Tyon, steered so wisely. I thank them both. As I said, we're a small organisation in terms of the team, but their passion, the team's passion for the Centre's mission to support and advocate for improved North-South and East-West relations and to provide independent analysis means that we are trusted and punch well above our weight. We're fortunate to have so many friends across this island and across these islands, as well as in Europe and beyond. Our solid belief in the value of cooperation in the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement means that our work depends on relationships of trust and friendship. That is why, after 25 years, while we will still formally be known as the Centre for Cross-Border Studies, from now on, we will operate under the name of the Centre for Cross-Border Cooperation. We hope that people will understand why this more properly reflects who we are. Research will always be at the heart of everything that we do, but it's research for a purpose, as Peter said right at the start of today. It's research that leads to action. So I hope that people will understand why this small property reflects who we are as we look forward to the next 25 years supporting and advocating for improved cooperation within and across these islands. Thank you all very, very much for being here today. Thank you. And may you now evacuate the capsule. And Cady will be around, so you can nab Cady, tether her to Earth, and ask your questions. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Just gonna thank you.